Fact may turn out to have profound implications for our own attitudes to death and the scientist's view of the human mind. Today, modern techniques of resuscitation mean that some of Shakespeare's travellers do return, and occasionally they tell of strange experiences, some of which appear to defy scientific explanation. In a respectable London suburb near Hampton Court lives a man who has twice been at death's door and survived to tell the tale. Derek Scull, age 66, is married with 2 children.
You seeing your mother today?
Probably will later.
He's a retired army major and now works in a large firm of lawyers.
Well, basically, I pride myself on being a fairly pragmatic, down-to-earth sort of person, but the experience that I underwent in 1978 remained etched in my memory for the last 8 years, and certainly I couldn't believe my eyes or my senses at the particular time. I had a heart attack, and I found myself in hospital in the intensive care unit on the first day. The hospital medical authorities had done everything they could for me. I was lying there in an operation robe, mask on my face, and obviously I'd received an injection of morphine or some sort of drug to keep me under control. I wasn't experiencing pain. In fact, I was feeling at peace with the world. And suddenly, I seemed to take off and float. Airborne, I suppose one would describe the word, into the corner of the room where I was able to look back, and I was conscious of lying there, and there was my own body. I thought, good gracious, what is this? In fact, I was sort of, I can describe it, I was looking at my toes on the ceiling, sort of looking over, and there was my body immediately below me. I was in the corner, left-hand corner of the room, looking down at this body, and I had a perfectly good eye view of the bed and the entrance to the ward. And then I was also suddenly conscious that outside the room there was my wife standing there in a red trouser suit talking to a nurse. I thought, my God, what an inappropriate time to arrive. I'm up there, there's the body, and what's going to happen? And I thought, something must happen. But the very next thing I was conscious of was sitting beside me was my wife in this bright red trouser suit, and I was there. I'd come down from the ceiling somehow, and there she was. This is why I know it wasn't a figment of my imagination, because it was so clear. I've given you the illustration of exactly what my wife was wearing. That was, and I couldn't have seen her at the time, so this absolutely convinced me. And it was certainly cemented after my second heart attack when I went through a totally similar experience. And I'm absolutely converted to this theory that something, call it your soul, call it whatever you like, does in fact temporarily detach itself from your body, goes to a vantage point, looks back and reviews the situation. And that's exactly what I felt I did on both occasions.
For the religious, experiences near death such as these may well have deep meaning. But recently, they have begun to intrigue men of science. At St. Thomas's Hospital in central London is a clinical neurophysiologist who is one of Britain's leading experts in brain function in a wide range of mental disorders. His name, Dr. Peter Fenwick. His interest in the so-called near-death experience is not religious, but to do with the science of consciousness. This program is his assessment of some of the latest scientific research.
There has been an enormous amount of scientific interest recently in near-death experiences. Originally, we thought they were rare, but every country in the world that has looked for them has found them. So you see, they occur commonly and really very widely. This particular area for me is quite fascinating because one of the things that I'm interested in consciousness. What is consciousness? Is it something which is just limited to the skull? Is it within the mind? Is it just the functioning of the brain? Or is it something much wider than that? And can the near-death experience help us with this at all? A classic near-death experience is that of Mrs. Barbara Lambert. Aged 37 and married with 4 children, she lives near High Wycombe. A close neighbour of hers is her twin sister Bobby. Although not so obviously near death as Major Skull, her case is nevertheless typical of the thousands that have been studied.
It happened the night after I had my first baby, and I'd had a very painful, long drawn-out labour, and I'd been very frightened, and at one point I had prayed that I would die because I found the pain so agonising. I was put into a room and I went to sleep, and I had a lot of after pains. It was great discomfort. The next thing I remember, my nose, what I thought was my nose, was 2 inches away from the ceiling. Very textured ceiling, which I didn't recognise. And I realised that I was too close to be viewing it from a bed. And then I turned round and I looked down on the person in the bed. I thought it was my twin sister. And I studied the face and realised that it was my face. We've got slightly different noses. And, you know, that in fact it was me. When I realised that I was out of my body, I was slightly frightened for a short time. But after that, it seemed quite natural. The next thing, I felt that I was in this long, dark tunnel with a very, very bright light at the end, so brilliant. It was more brilliant than the sun, absolutely brilliant. And I felt it was very natural to be drifting towards the end. It seemed very peaceful and quite natural thing to do. You know, I didn't feel that I could go the other way. I just felt it was like a magnet being drawn towards the end. But as I got closer and closer, it was as if the light was more of a flickering light, and, you know, I wanted to go there. But I arrived at the end and I realised I had to stop there, that I couldn't just go through. I stopped there, and when I looked through, it was like looking through a window. As I looked, I could in fact see it was like a small country garden, and then I could see a man. He was dressed in like a brown, lightly tweeded suit, no tie, and was stood behind a fence. So he was just a few feet away from me. But he recognised me, so I felt as if I had like a physical appearance. He asked me why I wanted to die. I can remember thinking, is it Grandad? I knew that he had died, so that I must be at the point of death. He died when I was 9 years old. And I felt that if I went further from the point where I was, that I would die. And it's as if he was veering me towards decision. He did say, well, who would look after the baby? And when I said, well, I don't know who can look after the baby, that's when I felt that I was back in my body, having made that decision. I'd made a decision to live. It definitely wasn't a dream. It actually physically happened. I couldn't tell you what I dreamt last night, last week, but it was near 17 years ago on March the 1st. And it's as if it happened 5 minutes ago. It's that clear. I've never forgotten it.
Now, that was one of many dramatic near-death experiences. Could they have a simple explanation? An obvious explanation for the near-death experience is that they've been caused by what the doctors have done for patients. Now, anesthetic gases, we know, can produce mystical experiences. We also know that drugs such as the opiates can produce mystical experiences. Now, there are real problems with the traditional drug explanation. Firstly, you'd expect people to be confused. In near-death experiences, they're not. And secondly, you'd expect the experience itself to be very random, but it isn't. It's quite specific. There have been many different studies now from throughout the world which show that the experiences that people have fall into certain definite groups. Not everybody has all the experiences, but nevertheless they do seem to be forming a pattern. A good example of how remarkably consistent the experiences seem to be is the case of a Merseyside retired nurse who, 18 years ago, was so ill she was almost given up for dead.
I had a minor operation in 1969, and things went wrong during that operation. And I was very, very poorly for about 3 days. And on the Saturday morning, the nurse came, said, "Mrs. Williams, I'd like to take your temperature." After the operation that I'd just had, apparently I was bleeding, but nobody knew this at the time. She took my temperature, went to the next bed, and I leant over to get my tea and collapsed. And with that, I seemed to leave my body. And I went up onto the clock on the wall. But I wasn't conscious of walking or anything. I just sort of floated to the clock on the wall in the ward. I felt real. It felt I was really up there. You know, it was my body that was up there. My whole body. My dead body was down on that bed. It wasn't like a dream at all. It was real life. And by this time, the doctor had been summoned, and the sisters, the 2 night sisters, were there, trying to get my blood pressure. The SCN was trying to get my blood pressure on one side, and the doctor, with an Australian voice, said to try it on the other arm. So when the doctor tried to pummel me on my chest, and nothing happened, and the nurse said, "I'm sorry, I just cannot get blood pressure." This doctor said, "I'm sorry, sister, she's gone. Pulmonary embolism."
Sorry, sister, I think she's gone.
I just didn't understand what all the panic was about, you see. I couldn't believe that I had died, because I felt fine up there by the clock. And I couldn't understand why they were fighting for me. With that, though, they pulled my bed with the oxygen cylinder away from the wall and were taking me out of the ward. But as soon as I saw them taking my body, my dead body on the bed away, I thought, gosh, I'd better go back. And I thought, well, I can't let them go without me. And I seemed to come from that position by the clock back into my body with a thud sort of thing, you know. And then I had a lot of pain. Just for seconds, it was a great deal of pain again, but I hadn't had any pain, you know, when I came out of my body. I didn't come to till about 11:30 in the morning, but in that time, from 6:30 till 11:30, I was up in what I presume to be heaven. It was really a tunnel of light. It was just a vivid brightness, very serene, tranquil. I went up to this beautiful park, vivid colours, and gorgeous music. A chorus of voices singing, and in the background there were sort of trumpets. Beautiful music. I saw several people that I knew, They appeared to have just gowns on, and I saw my father in this place. He, too, seemed to be sort of floating around, no effort. No words spoken, but calm welcome, you know. It's nice to see you again. In that time, my husband apparently was sent for and saw me and was told then that I had gone and told to come back the next day for my death certificate. But then there was just this vivid brightness, and there I saw some pontifical being. I presumed it was the good Lord. This figure was radiant, absolutely radiant, white gown, and he didn't speak, but he welcomed me. He was standing by the side of a throne, and he was letting the little children play around there. And I thought then, what a wonderful person you are, just as I had imagined the good Lord to be. I was not allowed to stay there. But I didn't want to come back. I didn't want to come back from that place. It was beautiful.
So are there perfectly conventional, ordinary, matter-of-fact explanations for these experiences? Let's take them by stages. Firstly, what we might call the later stage, or the heavenly stage. Can we explain that? In our Christian culture, painters throughout the centuries seem pretty agreed on what the good Lord looks like. Heaven, too, is often depicted, filled with radiant beings. So perhaps it's not surprising that in some, but not all, near-death experiences, the mind will construct those very images. Eastern religions, too, have similar figures, and near death they often experience meeting their own heavenly beings. And recently, we've discovered a possible scientific explanation for both the mystical experience and the light. Deep within the human brain is a specific part that, when stimulated, can induce feelings of ecstasy. It's called the limbic system. Now, frequently, those feelings are associated with experiences of light. The interesting point is that that part of the brain is particularly sensitive to lack of oxygen. Near death, oxygen is precisely one of the things that people lack. So there seem to be then scientific explanations for most of the later parts of the experience. The feelings of bliss, consciousness, the cultural explanations for the heavenly environment that people go into. Although there are questions which remain about this, nevertheless, we can, to a certain extent, explain them by the way the brain works. However, we still have to explain the earlier parts of the experience. And here, it does raise the question of possibly a rather wider and more challenging view of consciousness being required. The out-of-body experiences that people describe near death are, to me, the most interesting, because there's something we can attempt to verify scientifically. The conventional explanation is they are hallucinations or alterations in brain functioning in some way or another. But the interesting question is this: if, during an out-of-body experience, the individual is able to gain information which was not already in his brain and which he couldn't have picked up with his eyes and ears at the time that the experience was occurring, then maybe this tells us that the ordinary view of consciousness as being restricted to the brain may be too narrow. Some very important research on the out-of-body experience was published in a recent book by an American doctor, Michael Sabom. He's a cardiologist, and he's taped interviews with over 100 people who've had out-of-body experiences, mostly after heart attacks. Dr. Sabom started out very skeptical.
I had felt that I could prove that this was not real by showing that what they said they saw from the ceiling happening in the room during the resuscitation really didn't occur at all. but it was something that perhaps they had seen on television and would reconstruct as happening to them at the time they were unconscious. Perhaps they were lying semi-conscious on the bed and could hear what was going on in the room, and then later reconstruct that as a visual event. Now, were you unconscious at this time, or was this prior to the time that you lost consciousness?
No, I was unconscious before I hit the floor. I seem to be up and above just watching what's going on. Like, Doctor, I was out of my body, so to speak, looking down on it from a height above.
Could you see things in clear detail, or was it blurry?
No, it was quite a bit of detail.
What was one of the first things they did? Do you remember?
Struck me first.
That was
Yeah.
the first thing.
The doctor struck me with his fist, raised it above his head, and came down. Quite a blow. They took a plastic funnel-like thing and crammed it down my throat. The man that put it in there got it in, started in wrong, loosened up some of my teeth. And doing it, I got very angry with him, but not the body there on the table. I got angry watching him do it from above. And another doctor with a syringe and appeared to be an extra long needle, took it two-handed and thrust it in what apparently was my heart.
Now, you said that you were watching this from somewhere else in the room. Whereabouts, if you had to say physically, were you in the room if you were watching it from somewhere else?
Actually, I was above the ceiling, or appeared to be. But for all practical purposes, as far as I was concerned at that time, the ceiling was transparent. I was above the ceiling, but I could still see. And then when they got the machine set up, they took a little round disc, sort of a round, I think it was round, and placed them on my bare chest and hit me twice. I could watch what I think they call an oscilloscope. A straight line was appearing on it. But after they thumped me the second time, then it started fluctuating back and forth.
Having taped the interviews, Dr. Sabom looked up each patient hospital file where the specific details of how they'd been resuscitated had been recorded.
When I was able to go back and look at the details of the cardiac arrest itself and compare them to what the patient actually said he saw from the ceiling, there was a high degree of accuracy of what they said they saw to what actually did occur. And I must say that this is something that I totally was not expecting to find.
I could see my face very clearly, and they were lifting my eyelids to see where my eyes were, I guess. They were pushing on my chest and putting an IV in my hand. I could also see them putting a little needle in my other hand, something about blood gases.
Many of these people were able to give me specific and unique events that were happening that were not discussed at the time, that were out of their physical visual field where they were lying, and were unique to that own resuscitation, and not something that was generally seen on routine resuscitations viewed on television or whatever.
They were putting an electric shock to my body, or something like that. I knew my body was jumping every time they put those pads on me. I didn't feel nothing. They gave me a shot in the groin. It appeared to me they were putting a shot in there, my right side. Well, the doctor came and said to me, he says, boy, you had a close thing. He says that I had died and all that stuff. I say, Doc, I said, I didn't die. I said, I seen everything you did. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I saw you with a needle trying to get in my right armpit and going around the other side and all that. I said, I saw it all. He said, that's impossible. He said, you were clinically dead. That was absolutely impossible. And he just didn't believe it. He wouldn't believe it. He just walked away. Well, I said to him, I said, is it true, Doc? He said, yeah, it happened. And he just shook his head and he walked away. But I'm telling you, I didn't feel dead. I mean, it was just like I was standing over there and talking to you there.
I've been able to show in many cases that what they said they saw actually did occur. I've looked into the traditional explanations for this, and they don't wash out. They don't explain how these people were able to see these things. So I'm left with the possibility that what they said happened to them actually did occur the way they said it occurred, i.e. they somehow looked at it from a position separate from their physical body.
Nevertheless, from the strictly scientific point of view, it's too soon to draw any certain conclusions. But if the findings of Dr. Seebohm are confirmed by other studies, then we really will have to look again at what the nature of human consciousness is. Because you see, if we can really show that evidence can be gained about the structure of our outside world by the human mind when it's not in the body, then this raises question for our whole scientific understanding of the nature of consciousness. But whether or not the out-of-body experience is able to tell us anything more about consciousness, the near-death experience itself raises the question, why is it there and what is its significance? It's been suggested by a group in America that this particular experience is encoded in the brain, and it's triggered off just near to death. There is within the brain a specific function which, as death approaches, prepares us for a transition, if it's a transition, or if we believe in oblivion, prepares us for oblivion. I think the most important thing, though, is that people who have these experiences feel that they're extremely, extremely real, and it alters their life and their attitude to death in a very profound way.
I was certainly glad that I had the experience, because at least my husband said that he didn't need any convincing, that miracles happen and that there is a good Lord. And if that's all I came back for, to convince my dear husband before he died that there was nothing to worry about, then I'm quite happy.
I feel now that I've experienced a different dimension, that there is somewhere where we all go, and that we all go to this same place. There'll be someone there who knows us to guide us, that it's not frightening and it's not painful, and it's a very natural progression, that you're drawn automatically to this place, and that, you know, it's a very loving, peaceful place to go to, you know, as natural as walking through a garden door or a garden gate.
If death is going to be one of those experiences which is preceded by the experience that I went through, well, then it's not a fearful thing. I mean, everybody is fearful of death because of the unknown. Obviously, one doesn't want to depart from this world feeling in great pain and agony. You can't wait to go out. But in my particular instance, if this is a forerunner of death, this is the way you go out, feeling serene and at peace with the world and your fellow beings, then quite honestly, it won't worry me when my time comes.